I'm super excited to host this discussion. Part of the reason is, again, I myself come from, I'm 20 years in the industry. I have a ton of experience on the consumer side, but the last 8 years in the enterprise side. And this topic is one that's pretty close to my heart in terms of finding a meaningful way to connect to our end customers. And it doesn't matter whether they're on the enterprise side, on the consumer side, whether the people that use your products are internal users or external users. So I'm super excited to hear perspectives from our panelists today. And why don't we just jump in and introduce yourself for a couple minutes.
Thank you. So I'm Sean Flynn. I'm a partner with Shasta Ventures. Shasta Ventures is an early stage venture firm based here out of the Bay Area. We invest really in three core areas. One, consumer internet, companies like Nextdoor, Dollar Shave Club, enterprise software, companies like Apptio, which you may be aware of, and then the connected hardware space, which includes companies like Nest, Eero, and Fetch, which you heard from just previously. The firm was really started based on this idea of backing founders and teams that were maniacal, almost obsessive about the end user experience. And that's not to diminish the value of the underlying technology, not to diminish the value of marketing and sales. Obviously, to build a special company, you need to be great in lots of different dimensions. But for us, what really sits at the center of everything is the customer, how they experience your technology, how they learn about it, and how they interact with it across all the different areas in which they're touching your services and products. And so we're excited to be here and part of the panel today.
Welcome.
Morning. I'm Ron Pollard, Chief Information Officer of Specialized Bikes. We're here in Morgan Hill, so really close by. I've been fortunate to be there for 20 plus years and see a lot of disruption to what's changing in the bike industry. One of the things was interesting, and just talking about the intelligence and the recognition on features of a body, one of the things that's big for us is body geometry and fit. And you look at athletes, and not even athletes, anyone that rides, is how can we get you to fit better on a bike that the experience is better. So whether it's peak performance, right, as a racer, or just enjoying your recreation time out on that bike to get you out more. So interesting there. And then what we see is just major disruption to the marketplace. We're sold in 90 countries. One of the big opportunities I have to address, and it's very difficult, is getting sell-through data from around the world. Dealing with 200 different POS systems from those retail channels that we don't own, right? To give you the experience to pick and collect, right? Pick up in store and or know from our distribution centers, which we know where that product is, right? Yes, we can ship it, but there's a bigger delay. So really connecting what's going on in the world with the POS data. So making great headways there, and then changing platforms. Boy, that's really big for us, Yes, you have the back end, and still B2B is really big. That won't go away from us. Applying these to the retailer. As the retailer is changing, and how we keep them profitable is huge. And so tying what the rider is looking at from what we know in our analytics to what they can see on B2B to what product they're not stocking or should be stocking is really, really key for us in inventory turns and our whole supply chain. So it's a great time in disruption. So.
Very good. Paul Chapman, the CIO of Box. Prior to Box, I was actually CIO over at HP Software. So the reason I mention that is that you talk about two very contrasting sort of companies. One company born in the last century that sort of got itself entrenched in the way it operates, and now I'm at a born in the cloud, grown up digital company, which is has a high millennial workforce, and in fact might not make you feel any better, but our founders aren't that far past 20 years of age. So, yeah. but an entirely different way of thinking and operating and working. And Box is often known for sort of the first party application that people know. We have 35,000 files a second get pushed to the platform, but really it is about a interoperable platform that actually is used by close to 100,000 developers today for curating all sorts of experiences in sort of the platform economy and the internet of APIs. And so when we think about user experience and those types of things, it's there's sort of two dimensions to that. It's one, how can we enable experiences by having a platform that fits into whatever experiences companies are curating, and then also how do we focus on making sure that we have a secure, compliant, scalable, reliable service that has a great intuitive user experience as well.
Yeah. I also connect back to the last statement that Yves Behar made, which I thought was really quite illuminating about customers, end users not actually wanting to put up anymore with a disconnected experience, and I thought that was pretty key. I'm curious, in your different areas, different perspectives, how do you think about a connected experience for your different types of end users? How do you define it? How do you measure it?
I'm happy to start. So, we think about connecting with your customers in a 360-degree manner. It's not just about the product or service that you're putting in front of them. Obviously, that is a very core part of what value you create for your end users, but it goes beyond that, right? Customer support, which historically has been viewed as a cost center, we really view that as a potential revenue driver. It's a way to deepen the relationship with your customer, right? We're investors in Nest, right? Part of what they're offering is the experience of the device on the wall, but there's also the installation process. How do you actually make something that's quite scary and perhaps overwhelming to a lot of customers, make it simple, make it easy for them to understand? They thought about all the little details that go into the tools that they provide and the instructions that go along with it, right? So there's far more in our eyes than just the product or service, and you need to take that all-encompassing view to ultimately deliver a really simplified experience to your customers.
Yeah, what we see, and this has been out there for a long time, the experience of purchasing a bike can be very intimidating, because to the 20-year-olds, we go in and you face someone that might be a racer, and they're not giving you really the time for the category that you're looking at to give you a really understanding of what you're selecting. And it's not just about color, right? It's about how are you going to utilize that utility, that bike that you're going to buy, that will give you the experience of the desired outcome. And so what we see changing, and if you went to specialized.com today, it's very aesthetic to the racer. But we need to know you. We need to know, are you a mountain bike rider, right? Are you a road rider, a recreation rider? What about a turbo, which is an e-bike, which is a huge up-and-coming thing for the whole world. Electrical assist bike that can give you 90% pedal assist to commute to work or wherever you're doing at 27 miles an hour. Or the Levo, which is another subject for electrical assist for the mountain. But what we see is knowing who that rider is. Change that experience to be what you're looking for to help navigate then from the bike to the product and category that goes along with it, and then really get you into the community. And then from the community is, what about service? Back to the service aspect of it, knowing how much you're riding, that your bike needs to be serviced, right? So putting all these things together is really, really huge, and something that we're working on.
Yeah, for me, I think it's a little different, because when we talk about bikes in the most part, or Nest, it's more has a consumer perspective to it. Mm-hmm. Whereas when you're in the enterprise segment, it's a little different, because you're not necessarily catering to just a set of individual end users, but it's an enterprise, and we have to think about things from an outside-in perspective. And what does the workforce look like today? I mean, you have to have these seamless experiences across any device, anywhere, at any time. And when you just look at work used to be this place you went to. It's much more of a state of mind now. And if you look at the autonomy that people have to do their jobs, you have to think about how do you create a set of experiences that allow them to do their job through whatever it is, whatever service you're providing. And so, we spend a lot of time really thinking about. I think the last statistics show about 50 million U.S. workers don't sit at a desk anymore or even go to an office, and that's set to climb to over 100 million by 2020. And so, how do you think about new style of worker, new style of workplace, and much more open, much more social, much more collaborative? The grown-up digital workforce, the people entering the workforce today have been educated by the Google and Amazon and Apple, and very, very different sort of digital native entering the workforce. And so how do you create a sort of consumer experience in the enterprise, but without disrupting some of that back-end enterprise capabilities you need around security and risk and compliance and regulatory and things like that. So we spend a lot of time sort of thinking about that sort of new style of sort of IT to some degree that's helping to drive new styles of business.
It would be great if you can actually expand upon that in terms of some of the greatest barriers, right? Especially in an enterprise environment, it's such a complex environment with so many bells and, so many pieces that need to come together. What are some of the greatest barriers you think that stand in the way of achieving that seamless connectivity?
Well, I don't know if, seamless connectivity, I think there's two types of barriers, and I'll touch on the seamless connectivity in just a second. I think generally the biggest barrier is not necessarily even the technology that's enabling some outcome. It is really the sort of the entrenched inertia of how organizations and or individuals themselves actually work. If you roll something out and expect somebody to change their habits and the way they work, comfort, familiarity breeds comfort, and people will default if it's passive for them to use or not use. Then I think adoption is inhibited primarily by just entrenched ways of working. If there's a forcing function that brings people to say a service over time, you'll see you see viral adoption. In fact, and in some cases, just almost we have it ourselves with services we've brought into Box. So I think that's sort of part of the challenge. It's not sort of connectivity. I think on the connectivity side, I think the most important thing is it's how we architect in enterprise architecture, how we enterprise sort of the IT landscape, the IT platforms. It is about an internet of APIs, internet of bots now as well, and it is about a platform economy, and how do you as a piece of the jigsaw puzzle fit into that architecture that gives more freedom, agility, and even the ability to switch out services as well. How do you bring that to the enterprise so that you can interoperate and interconnect and bring lots of services together to create an experience without disrupting the user experience, or you can change the user experience without having to rip out massive amounts of sort of architecture that got you to where you are. So,
Ron or Sean, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, one of the things that we see when you're trying to build software that's really simple, easy for your users to understand, easy for them to engage with, that there's a natural tension when designing that software between power and simplicity, right? If you ever sat around with product managers, they'd have thousands and thousands of ideas of features and functionality they want to put in the hands of their end users. And of course, you could build that. But if you were to throw everything in there, you end up with this Frankenstein product that's not very easy to use, and therefore no one uses it, right? And so, one of the earlier discussions was around design, right? We think in many ways design is the bridge between simplicity and power. How do you actually have products that are very powerful, that solve real problems for us, but are still simple for us to use? And I think that's one of the greatest challenges. But that's where great software can solve that.
Yeah, that's a great segue into my next question about research and design. What do you think the role of research and design is in terms of enabling more meaningful connected experiences, especially as we have newer and newer type of technologies coming in?
Yeah, I think research is critically important. There's lots of different types of research, and so I have affinities for some over others. There are obviously going to be lots of research done around customers' attitudes before you're designing a product, talking to the customers, understanding their problems, asking them what they want. I think, unfortunately, consumers aren't always the best at being able to articulate what they want. Actually, they're generally pretty good at articulating what they want, but not how you actually achieve that vision. If you think about what Apple has done over the years, getting rid of flash and removing the hard drive, like if you'd asked consumers whether or not they wanted that, they would have said no, right? But you had someone who had a vision of what value that would offer them. So that kind of research, I personally think it can lead you in the wrong direction. But what I'm a big believer in is behavioral research. So if you're building software, right, if you're building it within your own four walls and not getting it in front of your own customers, getting them to experience and watching them use it. I think that's a real loss, because with that comes significant learning and allows you to very quickly iterate on your product, iterate on your design. That's the type of research, that behavioral research, we strongly believe in and think is critical.
Great. Ron?
It's kind of hard for me to answer on this one from our brand perspective, but I will say on research, or of course, it's very important. It's understanding, one, who the customer is, but as we're trying to enable all these new technologies, is where can you deploy them? And it's tough for me because, again, it's 22, and it's not tough. It's that the excitement is too much. You have 22 countries that are all trying to move at one time to sell into 90 countries. And you have to be responsive and really know where is the biggest potential and return in the disruption that we're doing. That is the market ready for it, but also what's the consumer behavior. And the biggest one is China. And us not recognizing it's Tmall. No matter what you build, it doesn't matter. The user is going to use Tmall. And it kind of brings up in research is that if you really want to get to the head of the search engines and where people are looking at product, and maybe the brands are going to get there, but the cycling industry and everyone is very opposed to it, be on Amazon, because that's where your traffic is. Research would tell you, where are people going and looking? I mean, let's see, raise of hands, who doesn't use Amazon here? Is any hand going to go up? Okay, so those are the answers, but sometimes we don't want to take the research that is there and adopt that, because we don't want to also be too disruptive.
And to me anyway, I mean, going from the consumer side to the enterprise side, one of the personal realizations I had was research and design was a little bit late to come to the party on the enterprise side of things. I'd be curious to hear your perspective on how you use these amazing disciplines to really further your thinking in the product.
Yeah, and there's two sides to it. One is how I would think about it internally, with as I said before, with a sort of a millennial workforce that is used to sort of going out and bringing its own tools to the organization, and how you think about that. But as in Box, our first party application, we're fortunate enough now to have over 60% of the Fortune 500, close to 50 million end users, and features and capability that are used millions of times per day. So, in being sort of born in the cloud, we are able to gather massive amounts of intelligence about usage and consumption. And so we were talking about Excel earlier, and it's funny because 90% of what's in Excel is never used by 99% of the users. I think I always think about when I go into Excel, I use these 6 things, and there's like ribbons everywhere, and every time a new version comes out, there's like more ribbons and more tabs. And I'm like, I don't know what any of that stuff does, right? But without the intelligence of what gets used and by whom and how much, you end up carrying this heavyweight experience forward. So fortunately, whether you call it A/B testing or whether you could just call it intelligence we use a thing called Customer Sophistication Index, which is a CSI that actually looks at capabilities that are used on any given day. And as we look for introducing new features, you can actually look at what features you may take out, or the way you organize the screen, the way you organize the user experience can change based upon the interactions that we can actually capture and see from millions of end users. So that goes into a big data pool that is used to run analytics from, and then gets ingested back into engineering for that next sort of user experience evolution that we have. Internally, interestingly enough, it used to be this sort of this nervousness around shadow IT, and personally, I think it's like crowdsourcing. If you take the Jane Goodall approach and sort of use anthropology to see what's going on inside your organization, in the most part, the organization is kind of telling you what they need, what they're adopting, what they're using, and often you find that you may be paying for some service over here, and there's a non-sanctioned service that's creeping or accelerating its way into the organization over here. And it's an opportunity to sanction, to embrace, to bring in, behind your single sign-on, your 2-factor, to turn off something you're paying for that's being abandoned, and so on. So I think there's lots and lots of intelligence that we can gain, both on the service we provide, of course, but then also in our own environments. So sort of watch what goes on in the wild and figure out how to embrace some of it.
Very, very cool. I think one of the things that you were saying about, what features take out, for those in design or familiar with design, it's actually simple is hard to do.
Yeah.
Simple experiences are incredibly difficult to pull off because this means you have to really pull the experience down to the core essence. And that also means that you understand your end users really, really well to give them exactly what they want at the time that they want to do the task that they want to do. So I have a great appreciation for products that are able to pull that kind of experience off. I actually want to switch gears a little bit and talk about potentially a product that was a good product but didn't succeed, and the reasons why it didn't succeed because it potentially lacked some of the connective mechanisms that we're looking for. I'd be curious to get some examples from you.
Yeah. One that comes to mind for me, and part of connectivity, obviously, is being available to people where they are, when they want it, et cetera. If you remember back to 2000, I think 2008, 2009, the iPhone had already come out. It obviously had gotten nice adoption. This is the time that Palm was trying to get not back into the market, but compete against Apple. And they released a product called Palm Pre, which was built on their WebOS operating system. And that product, the OS, actually, I think, got pretty good remarks from both consumers and from the press, et cetera. People liked the product. In fact, actually, they were ahead of Apple in some of their feature set. So it had background processing. It had the cards that today, when you swipe through and you multitask, Apple has that today. They had that back in 2009. But that product was not a success. When they launched the Palm Pre, it was only available through Sprint Nextel. That was the third carrier, and they were headed, unfortunately, in the wrong direction. And so you had a good product, and yet it wasn't getting into the hands of the customers that they wanted to reach because of their relationships, because of their distribution. And so, obviously, it's not just about building the great product. It's also about being available where your customers are that you have to really give thought to.
For us, I can think of two things. One was it wasn't necessarily a failure, but margin is king. And so where were some of the chases to the bottom? And for us, that market was BMX. And we couldn't compete in BMX because of either mail catalogs, right, internet sales. And it just wasn't where people were going to spend a premium for the brand that we want to be. So recognizing that and exiting. The other is it's helmets. One of the things in design is it doesn't work in all cultures. And we really saw sales in certain areas of the market weren't what they represented in other parts because it's a really big seller for us. And it really turned out is that we didn't understand sizing and the shapes of the different cultures out there. And so adopting, and it's very expensive though, to the tooling. And helmets are like a jigsaw puzzle going together with the ejection molding, right? But adopting that you're going to either have multiple factories, right, or multiple sets of toolings that are going to be able to fit your customers' needs. So getting that data back from the markets and then actually doing something about it in engineering.
Very good.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a good sort of direct sort of box failure in that regard. I think the way that I think about it is that how do we, the way we run our business, as an example, as well as our first-party platform, is today, somebody was talking about Uber being disrupted in, I think it was Malaysia today. It's interesting because I think that when you look at organizations like Uber, when you look underneath the covers of how they've architected and built and curate the service that we get as consumers, we get to leverage a massive ecosystem of innovation that's going on. And I think the way that it's about the architecture, and I think the way that, Uber as an example, I think they get their infrastructure from Amazon, messaging from Twilio, emails from SendGrid. They don't own cars or drivers. They don't own messaging, email. Payments from Braintree or Adyen, I don't remember which one. But the point is that they've really focused on where they differentiate and curate that experience in, you know, the last mile or the last few miles they do themselves, and that's really what they focus on, and they let the power of that ecosystem, you know, and if something in the ecosystem stops innovating or something new comes along, they can switch out pieces. And I think, just sort of long-winded way of getting back to your question though, is that for me, what I think about is how are we able to build agility into the architecture that runs the business of Box so that we can leverage the external ecosystem to accelerate time to the differentiating value that we bring, the things that are different. And that's how we protect ourselves from sort of having these failed, it's like, you know, you invest in software or services and they go out of business. How do we protect ourselves against that? And in the microservices world, the on-ramps are smaller and the off-ramps are smaller as well. They're not small, but they're smaller than they used to be.
Very cool. All right, well, I want to talk about the importance of ubiquity, especially as it relates to, you know, the consumer experiences that we have and this concept of ever-present connectivity. At what point is this you know, what's the right level of ubiquity for, say, a product or an experience? At what point does it become irrelevant or an overkill? Sean?
Yeah. So, you know, getting back to this idea of you wanting to be everywhere your customers are, you know, I think that fits nicely with the idea of ubiquity, but I think there are some limitations to that, right? I think it's important to be the places where your experience, your product is native, right? So, you know, one platform that people are now talking a lot about and there's some excitement for is these messaging platforms, moving beyond just one-to-one or group communications to being a platform for you to engage with services, for me to be able to order an Uber or order flowers from Facebook Messenger. And you know, one of the questions I have for that, I mean, their users are there, and so you could say, hey, we need to be there. But I think it raised the question of, is that really a native experience? Right? I go to Facebook Messenger to communicate with my family. I go there to communicate with my friends. Am I going there to order an Uber, right? Or is there a better way to do that when I'm on my phone and there's well-designed software? So I think thinking of the idea of, is it native to these platforms is an important filter when you're thinking about how ubiquitous you want to be. And then I think there's one other notion, which is pull versus push. So, you know, obviously anywhere a customer is looking for you and needs your service, you want to be there at that time. But there's also channels like email, for example, which is much more of a push channel where you're trying to get in front of them, get in, you know, in their way in a sense. And I think that can be detrimental if done too much, right? I think you need to be really thoughtful about how much you engage your customers in those channels where they're not asking for you. It still can be a very positive experience, but it also could be abused. And if abused, I think can really deteriorate the customer relationship.
Absolutely, and also, you know, customer behavior changes with availability of technology, with trends, with so many things that changes, right? And it goes back to coming one full circle of understanding your customer and the research around what type of behaviors they exhibit. So as they start moving to different channels, if it makes sense to be there and what is the best way to engage with them, right? Any other thoughts there, Ron?
Yeah, I would say for us it's an interesting relationship in that, one, you have a retailer there in the community that has a relationship. And so where do we connect those rather than interfering with them? And then don't invent things that are there. Strava's there. There's things that we don't need to do that the consumer's already picked what they want to use as a tool set there. And so how do we just really interconnect all these different pieces to give them on their journey, right, the experience that they want, than rather trying to control it. You know, the great thing about riding a bike is freedom, right? And so make sure we maintain that. It's, I think, very, very important.
Yeah, I completely agree, actually. I think that the key is, I don't know what to call it ubiquitous experience, but I think it's interoperability. And I think it's native interoperability across the different services that you're using. And so I think, you know, today, a lot of modern built services have that as part of their DNA. You know, as an example, we measure the effectiveness of the Box platform based on API calls, of which today half are coming from first-party app, and we have over 7 billion now, 14 billion a month, but over 7 billion are actually coming from third-party connections, and whether that's extending an experience out and it becomes a piece of the jigsaw puzzle that's delivering that experience, or it's interoperating with other services, maybe their chat services, and it's bi-directional as well. And I think that each time you do that, piece by piece, you're taking a piece of friction out of the experience. It's sort of taking the work out of work of switching and context switching and going back and forth, and you're creating more of an integrated and more of a digital experience, but at the same time you're not disrupting the choice around user experience either. So I think that's where it sort of comes together. I don't think it's a ubiquitous sort of experience from look and feel, but I think it's more of a ubiquitous experience of interoperability across the services that you're using.
Is there such a thing called as like too much connectivity? Like, there's certainly implications from privacy perspective, implications on the security side as well.
I think you have to rethink your risk posture, right? Earlier we were talking about, 4 years ago there was sort of religious belief about not moving to cloud-based services, and now it's like drinking air and breathing water in some cases. But you get into regulatory and data residency, and you get into compliance and regulatory controls and encryption, and depending on what vertical industry you're in, you have different regulatory controls, or it's HIPAA or FedRAMP or FinServ or what have you. And I think that you can't. I personally, I think that you can't have a service that's cloud-based unless, one, it's reliable and scalable, two, you have a great user experience, and three, and you can't trade off on any one of these, you have the right risk posture associated with your service for the consumers of it. So I think you now have to think about the thing that I think is actually better, though, is that if that's the reality of any service, then it means that any service that you're connecting to and interconnecting has to be maniacally focused on their security and their risk posture, and you get the benefit of these organizations that are focused on that collectively, which should actually mean that you're actually better protected. There will be holes. I mean, the internet went down for half a day 2 weeks ago, right? Yeah. So, but these are all things we're going to continue to learn from, right? I think that the biggest risk is taking no risk at some point. It doesn't mean to say you have to be, risk adverse, but you have to be careful.
Yep. I actually want to, look forward. Certainly there's been, lots of growth with the 3G and 4G networks, and it's opened a lot of doors especially as it relates to mobile and mobile-related experiences. In your, specifically from the trends that you're looking at, what is the next area of potential explosive growth as it relates to connectivity and connected experiences?
Yeah, and this is something we think a lot about in the venture world. So many great companies come out of these waves of big platforms, going back to the PC and then the internet and mobile, and so what's next? And we see some things on the horizon, the emergence of AR and VR and the types of applications and experience that can unlock that aren't possible today, right? We think about the connected car, right? What sort of experiences does that unlock as a result of us being in these cars and being connected at all times? And so, voice-enabled assistants. I think someone mentioned Amazon Echo, right, as a platform for extending applications and services to reach consumers. So we think there's a lot of interesting areas that have the potential to be that next platform. I think that's the big question. What is it going to be, and when will it be? My belief is that all of them will actually be really important in the long run, and it becomes more a question of timing. And that, is a result of how quickly these devices get out there into the public, how quickly they're able to offer really great experiences. In some cases, it will take technological breakthroughs to get to the next level. And so, our perspective is to engage there, to become very facile with what's happening, to watch what sort of applications are emerging, and to be ready when things really do take off.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you have as you said, driverless cars, ARs, VRs, bots, so many different kinds of things that are basically entering our daily lives. It doesn't matter whether it's your personal life or your professional life. I'm curious to get your thoughts on, just to build on your previous answer, what's the importance of a cohesive experience across all of these, and what are some things that we should be, like companies and employees should be kind of aware of, prepping for this potential transition when that tipping point does hit us?
Yeah, I mean, I think cohesive experience is important. If anyone's ever used an Apple TV and had to sign in to 15 different video services, and like that's obviously a not cohesive experience. And you're like, wait a second, I just signed in on my phone and my iPad and not my TV. Like, there's probably a better way. So I think the more devices, the more screens, the more platforms that you are offering your service on, the challenge is upon us to make it a cohesive experience, to make it simple, to make it easy and intuitive, for the end users using those services.
Any thoughts in terms of what companies can do or employees can do in terms of prepping for this potential transition? Yeah, so I mean, I think the North Star for us with the companies that we invest in back, that we encourage them to always think about is their customer. That everything emanates and everything starts and ends with the customer. So understanding their challenges, is the best way to look into the future. And you're not building technology for technology's sake. You're not, going on to Amazon Echo and the Alexa platform just because you have to be there, but because it actually matters and because it actually can deliver, a better experience and can solve problems for your customers. We think that's when it makes sense to go after, as opposed to just chasing the next biggest platform because you think you're going to get a bunch of users as a result of it. Chances are you won't if you're not delivering a magical experience. Makes sense. Ron, any thoughts on this?
Going back to the previous question on speed and the mobile aspect, which is actually really big, and we still see there's a lot that happens at the desktop because of the experience. But where it really is engaging and changing for us, it's video. Video is really, really big. And how to get that where it delivers an experience in all these different formats that we talked about earlier of what type of rider are you, right? And offering up those images and those videos that relate to that experience, because those stories sell you and they give you an emotional tie back to the product and really give you that emotion of, I do want to go do this activity, or I want to get this new product because I'm going to go from riding on the road, I want to do mountain, or I'm going to engage my family, and seeing that imagery is important. But the speed of it is really key, and then the cost of that ownership, because our product line changes every year. Every 9 months or so, that product is flipping almost 90%. So it's very, very costly.
Any thoughts on what's your prediction on the next area of explosive growth?
Well, I think that just look at what's gone on in the last month. I mean, 2 weeks ago, there was the Gartner Symposium in Orlando, and it was heavily focused on AR, VR, connected cities. Last week, there was the IBM World of Watson, 20,000 people in Vegas, and there are robots everywhere. Watson being, and the brain, the AI was a big focus, and VR was a big focus. There was the Constellation Conference at the end of last week in Half Moon Bay. That was all they talked about, and I think today it's been a really strong, current of conversation as well. So I don't think I have anything that says it's any different. There's a lot of people that are smarter than me that are all sort of facing in that direction. I think the cohesive thing is an interesting one. I'm not so sure that. Here's something that 2 out of 5 children today learn how to use gadgets before they learn how to talk. These intuitive experiences they have are wiring kids today, and even the millennials that are entering the workforce, very different. Their ability to context switch, whether they're on GChat, Slack, Instagram, what have you, they can switch very, very quickly. And I think that if we have if any one of those user experiences isn't intuitive, it will be abandoned and dropped very, very quickly. So I think the cohesiveness across all these different sort of services and so on is going to be really hard to obtain. I think you have to be able to play in an interoperable way, and at the same time have a user experience that is frictionless. Otherwise, the cohesiveness across is very hard. Is going to be very hard to do because people aren't working necessarily together.
Yep.
They're working for the good of the ecosystem, which is good today, but they're not necessarily working together. So.
All right. Well,
Must be
we'll
lunchtime.
wrap up the panel. Well, thank you very much. This was wonderful. And,